I should have seen it coming when my stepmother smiled at me on the porch that morning. She never smiled at me. But there she was, June 2nd, 10:47 a.m., holding the door open with one hand and a glass of iced tea in the other, telling me how glad she was I could finally visit, and I actually believed her. If you want to hear how this story ends, and trust me, you do, make sure you're following this channel, because what I found 3 weeks later changed everything. I've been a firefighter for 11 years. I learned early that dangerous situations announce themselves quietly. A wisp of smoke under a door. A wall that's warm when it shouldn't be. The moment before everything ignites is always softer than people expect. My stepmother was like that. Soft-spoken, careful, always saying the right thing in front of my father. And I'd spent 8 years watching her the way I watch a room before I enter it, looking for the signs everyone else misses. She married my father when I was 23. Her name was Diane Pruitt, 51 at the time, a real estate agent with a Mercedes and a smile that looked expensive. My father was 60, recently widowed, and lonely in a way that made him vulnerable. My mother had died of ovarian cancer 2 years earlier, and he'd spent those years moving through the house like a ghost, touching her things, sitting in her chair, unable to let go. Diane fixed that. She cleared out my mother's closet within 3 months of moving in, repainted the living room, replaced the furniture. She said it would help him heal. He said she was right. I said nothing, because I was young and living 2 states away and didn't understand yet that grief doesn't heal faster when you erase it. I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, in a house my parents bought in 1992. It was a small 2-story on a quiet street, with a cottonwood tree in the front yard that dropped seeds like snow every June. My mother planted tulips every spring. My father taught me how to change a tire in the driveway when I was 16. The house wasn't impressive, but it was ours. After my mother died, I visited less. It hurt too much to see the house without her in it, to see my father pretending he was fine when he clearly wasn't. When he told me he was dating someone, I was relieved. When he told me he was marrying her, I was cautious. When I met Diane for the first time at their small courthouse wedding, I was polite. She was polite back. Too polite. The kind of polite that feels like a performance, like she was rehearsing lines she'd written in advance. Over the next 8 years, I visited maybe twice a year. Christmas, and sometimes in summer if my shift schedule allowed. Diane was always welcoming, always warm, always just slightly off in a way I couldn't name. She'd hug me and say she was so glad to see me, but her hands would rest on my shoulders for just a beat too long, like she was measuring me. She'd ask about my work, my apartment, my life, and then she'd turn the conversation back to herself before I finished answering. My father seemed happy. That's what I told myself. He smiled more, went out more, talked about trips they were planning. If I noticed that he looked tired sometimes, or that he deferred to her on every decision, I wrote it off as marriage. People compromise. People adapt. I didn't see the smoke yet. The visit on June 2nd was supposed to be short. I was on leave after a bad call, an apartment fire, 2 kids we got out but barely, smoke inhalation that left me coughing for a week. My captain told me to take time, so I drove the 11 hours from Sioux Falls to Fargo and called my father to say I'd be in town. He sounded surprised, almost nervous, but he said of course, come by, Diane would love to see me. I arrived mid-morning. The house looked different. New shutters, a freshly paved driveway, the cottonwood tree gone. I parked on the street and stared at the empty space where the tree used to be. Diane opened the door before I reached it. She was wearing white linen pants and a pale blue blouse, her hair shorter than I remembered, styled in a way that made her look younger. Jessie. She pulled me into a hug. I smelled her perfume, something floral and cloying. I'm so glad you're here. Your father's at a doctor's appointment, but he'll be back in an hour. Come in, I just made tea. I followed her inside. The living room was different too. New couch, new paint, new curtains. Nothing of my mother's left except a single photograph on the mantel, my parents on their wedding day, small and tucked behind a vase. We sat in the kitchen. She poured tea into glasses with too much ice and talked about the renovations they'd been doing, about the garden she was planning, about a trip to Arizona they'd just taken. I nodded and sipped tea that was too sweet and looked around the kitchen where my mother used to bake bread every Sunday. "Where's the cottonwood?" I asked. Diane's smile tightened. "Oh, we had to take it down. It was diseased. The arborist said it could fall on the house. Dad didn't mention it. He was upset about it at first, but I think he's adjusted. Change is hard for him, you know." I nodded. I didn't believe her, but I nodded. She stood and gestured toward the porch. "Let's sit outside. It's such a beautiful day." We walked out onto the back porch, a small deck overlooking the yard. Diane sat in one of two new wicker chairs and crossed her legs. I sat across from her and set my tea on the side table. "So," she said, "how long are you staying?" "Just a few days. I need to get back by the weekend." "Of course. You work so hard. Your father's very proud of you, you know." "Is he?" Her smile faltered. "Just slightly. Of course he is. He talks about you all the time." I looked out at the yard. The garden she'd mentioned was half-finished, bare soil and stakes marking where plants would go. It looked raw, unfinished, like something started and abandoned. "Jessie," Diane said, her voice softer now, "I wanted to talk to you about something." I looked at her. "Your father and I have been discussing the future. He's 70 now, and his health isn't what it used to be. We've been thinking about what happens if something happens to him." "Okay. We've updated his will. Everything's in order. But I wanted you to know that the house will stay with me, as his spouse. I'm sure you understand." I said nothing. "There will be some things set aside for you, of course. Personal items, a small inheritance. But the house itself, well, it makes sense for me to keep it. I'll be the one living here." I looked at her. I thought about my mother's tulips, my father's tools in the garage, the cottonwood tree that was gone. I thought about the fact that Diane had just told me, unprompted, that I wouldn't inherit my childhood home. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "I just thought it was better to be clear. So there's no confusion later. Does Dad know you're telling me this?" Her smile returned. "Of course. We discussed it." I didn't believe her. But I didn't argue. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Diane stood. "I should start lunch. Your father will be hungry when he gets back." I stayed on the porch. I heard her moving in the kitchen, the sound of cupboards opening and closing, water running. I looked at the unfinished garden and thought about the way firefighters are trained to recognize danger. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a sense that something's wrong even when everything looks fine. I felt it then. My father came home an hour later. He looked older than I'd expected, his shoulders stooped, his walk slower. He hugged me and said he was glad I was there, but his eyes kept darting toward Diane, like he was checking to see if he'd said the right thing. We had lunch together at the kitchen table. Diane served chicken salad and talked about their trip to Arizona, about a timeshare they were considering, about friends they'd made in a retirement community group. My father nodded along, ate slowly, and said little. I watched him. I noticed the way he hesitated before speaking, the way he looked to Diane before answering my questions, the way his hands shook slightly when he lifted his glass. "Dad," I said, "are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine," he said quickly. "Just tired." "He's been tired a lot lately," Diane said. "The doctor says it's normal at his age." "What else did the doctor say?" "Nothing to worry about." Diane's voice was bright, dismissive. "Just routine blood work." "Right, honey?" My father nodded. "Right." After lunch, Diane said she had errands to run. She kissed my father on the cheek and told me to make myself at home, and then she left. I heard her car pull out of the driveway, and I waited until the sound faded. "Dad," I said, "are you okay?" He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in his face, fear, maybe, or exhaustion. "I'm fine, Jesse." "You don't look fine." "I'm just old." "You're 70, not 90. He smiled. It was thin. "Feels like 90 some days." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was cold. "What did the doctor really say?" He hesitated. Then he said, "They're running tests." "For my heart." "It's probably nothing." "Does Diane know?" "Of course. She didn't mention it. She doesn't like to worry people." I wanted to say that I wasn't people, I was his daughter, but I didn't. I just squeezed his hand and said, "Keep me updated, okay?" "I will." But I could tell he wouldn't. I stayed for 3 more days. I helped my father with small things around the house, changing light bulbs, fixing a leaky faucet, organizing the garage. Diane was pleasant, accommodating, always hovering just close enough to monitor our conversations. On the morning I left, she hugged me and said she hoped I'd visit again soon. I drove back to Sioux Falls and tried to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. 3 weeks later, my father called. His voice was weak, shaky. "Jesse, I'm in the hospital." I was at the station, mid-shift. I stepped outside into the parking lot. "What happened?" "My heart. They're saying I need surgery." "When?" "Tomorrow." "I'll be there tonight." I called my captain, got emergency leave, and drove 11 hours straight. I arrived at the hospital in Fargo just after midnight. My father was in a private room, asleep, hooked up to monitors that beeped softly in the dark. Diane was sitting in a chair by the window, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in. "Jesse. You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." She stood and hugged me, but it felt perfunctory. "He's stable. The surgery is scheduled for 9 a.m. "What kind of surgery?" "Bypass. Triple, they think." I looked at my father. He looked small in the hospital bed, his skin pale, his breathing shallow. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked. It all happened very fast. He collapsed yesterday afternoon. I called the ambulance, and they brought him here. "And you didn't think to call me then?" Her expression hardened. I was focused on him, Jesse. Not on managing phone calls. I bit back what I wanted to say and sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed. I stayed there all night, watching my father sleep, listening to the monitors. The surgery went well. That's what the surgeon said. My father woke up groggy and confused, but stable. They said he'd need weeks of recovery, maybe months. Diane nodded and asked about home care options. I asked if I could stay for a while to help. "That's not necessary," Diane said. "I'll take care of him." "I'd like to help." "You have your job. Your life. I can handle this." I looked at my father, who was watching us with glassy, unfocused eyes. "Dad, do you want me to stay?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Diane. "He needs rest," Diane said. "Not stress." I stayed for 2 more days, until my father was moved out of ICU. Then I drove home, because I didn't have a choice. My leave was up, and I had bills to pay. But I called every day. And every day, Diane answered. "He's resting. He's sleeping. He's not up for talking right now." On the 4th day, I called early, before 7 a.m. My father answered. "Jesse." His voice was clearer, stronger. "Dad. How are you feeling?" "Tired. But okay." "Is Diane there?" "She's still asleep." "Good. I need to ask you something." A pause. "Okay. Did you and Diane really update your will?" Another pause. Longer. "What?" "She told me you updated your will." That the house goes to her. I don't remember doing that. My chest tightened. Dad, this is important. Did you sign anything recently? Any legal documents? I don't know. She handles all that. What do you mean, she handles it? The bills, the paperwork. I just sign what she tells me to sign. I closed my eyes. I thought about smoke under a door, about walls that are warm when they shouldn't be. Dad, I need you to do something for me. Okay. Don't sign anything else unless I see it first. Can you do that? Jesse, you're scaring me. I'm not trying to scare you. I just need you to be careful. Diane wouldn't. Just promise me. He was quiet. Then he said, okay. I promise. I hung up and sat in my apartment, staring at the wall. I thought about the house, the tree, the way Diane had looked at me on the porch. I thought about my mother's things, erased. My father's confusion. The way Diane controlled every conversation, every decision. I thought about the fact that firefighters are trained to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I called a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Martin Osborne, a family law attorney in Fargo I found through an online search. I called his office and explained the situation as carefully as I could: elderly father, recent marriage, possible financial manipulation, concerns about a will. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, do you have power of attorney? No. Does your stepmother? I don't know. You need to find out. If she has financial power of attorney and he's deemed incapacitated, she can do almost anything. He's not incapacitated. He just had surgery. Legally, that might be enough. Has he been diagnosed with dementia or any cognitive issues? Not that I know of. Then he can still make decisions. But if she has POA, she can act on his behalf whether he agrees or not. I felt my hands go cold. How do I find out? You can check with the county recorder's office. POA documents are sometimes filed there. Or you can ask him directly. And if she does have it? Then you need to move fast. If you believe she's exploiting him financially, you can petition for guardianship, but that's expensive and slow. The better option is to get him to revoke it while he's still able. And if he won't? Then there's not much you can do unless you can prove exploitation or undue influence. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called the county recorder's office and asked if there were any power of attorney documents on file for my father, Richard Allen Brennan. The clerk put me on hold. When she came back, she said, yes. Filed March 18th of this year. Durable power of attorney for health care and finances, naming Diane Marie Brennan as agent. March. 3 months ago. 2 months before I'd visited. Can I get a copy? You can request one in person or by mail. You'll need to fill out a form and provide ID. I requested it by mail and paid the fee. Then I sat down and tried to think clearly. Power of attorney meant Diane could access his bank accounts, sell property, make medical decisions. It didn't mean she owned anything, but it meant she controlled everything. I thought about the house. If my father had signed a new will leaving it to her, and she had POA, she could make sure that will was executed exactly as written. And if my father was confused, recovering, or simply too tired to fight, he might not even realize what he'd signed. I called my father again. Diane answered. He's resting, Jesse. I need to talk to him. He needs rest. Diane, put him on the phone. A long pause. Then I heard shuffling, and my father's voice. Jesse? Dad, I need to ask you something. Did you give Diane power of attorney? Silence. Dad? I think so. She said it was in case something happened to me. When did you sign it? I don't remember. A few months ago, maybe. Did you read it? Diane explained it. I closed my eyes. Dad, do you understand what that means? It means she can help me if I can't make decisions. It means she can make decisions for you even if you can. Jesse, she's my wife. She's trying to help. I know you think that. His voice turned defensive. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm worried. About what? About you. About the house. About what happens if. Jesse, stop. You're making this into something it's not. I wanted to argue, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the confusion. Pushing him now would only make him pull away. Okay, I said. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure you're okay. I'm okay. I'm just tired. I love you, Dad. I love you too. Diane's voice came back on the line. Jesse, I think that's enough for today. She hung up. I sat in my apartment and thought about the fact that I was 11 hours away, working 60-hour weeks, with no legal standing to intervene. I thought about my father, recovering in a house that used to be my mother's, signing documents he didn't understand because the woman he trusted told him to. I thought about the way fires start. Slowly. A spark, a bit of fuel, oxygen. By the time you see the flames, it's already out of control. The POA document arrived a week later. I read it carefully. It was standard language, but broad. Diane had authority over finances, healthcare, and property. It was durable, meaning it stayed in effect even if my father became incapacitated. At the bottom, my father's signature. Shaky, but legible. I called Martin Osborne again. She has full POA, I said. Can you prove she's misusing it? Not yet. Then you need evidence. Bank statements, property records, anything that shows she's acting against his interests. How do I get that if I'm not on his accounts? You ask him. Or you wait until something happens that gives you standing to petition for guardianship. And if by then it's too late? He was quiet. Then he said, then you do what you can with what you have. I hung up and made a decision. I requested a week of leave, packed a bag, and drove back to Fargo. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I asked for a copy of the prepared deed. It took 20 minutes, but they found it. The deed transferred the property from Richard Allen Brennan to Diane Marie Brennan. Effective upon filing. My father's signature was at the bottom. Dated April 30th. A month before I'd visited. 2 weeks after the POA. I stood in the assessor's office and stared at the document. I thought about my mother, who'd planted tulips every spring in that yard. I thought about my father, who'd taught me to change a tire in that driveway. I thought about Diane, standing on the porch with iced tea and a smile, telling me the house would stay with her. She'd already taken it. She just hadn't filed the paperwork yet. I called Martin Osborne from the parking lot. She has a quitclaim deed, I said. Signed by my father. Is it filed? Not yet. Then it's not final. If you can get your father to revoke it, you might be able to stop it. He doesn't even remember signing it. That might be grounds to challenge it. But you'd need a doctor to evaluate him, to testify that he wasn't competent when he signed. He just had heart surgery. He's recovering. Then move fast. Before she files it. I drove to the house. Diane's car was in the driveway. I parked on the street and walked to the front door. I didn't knock. I used the key my father had given me years ago, the one I'd never given back. The door was locked from the inside. I rang the bell. Diane opened it. Her expression shifted from surprise to suspicion in less than a second. Jesse. I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to check on Dad. He's resting. I'd like to see him. She hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked past her into the house. My father was sitting in the living room, a blanket over his legs, watching television with the sound off. Dad. He looked up. His face brightened. Jesse. What are you doing here? I came to see you. Diane followed me into the room. She didn't call ahead. I wanted it to be a surprise, I said, keeping my voice light. My father smiled. Well, it's a good one. I sat down next to him. How are you feeling? Better. Still tired, but better. That's good. I glanced at Diane, who was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. Diane, do you mind if I talk to Dad alone for a minute? Her jaw tightened. I think I should stay. It's fine, my father said. I'll call if I need you. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she turned and walked into the kitchen. I waited until I heard the water running. Then I leaned close to my father and kept my voice low. Dad, I need to ask you about something. Do you remember signing a deed for the house? He frowned. A deed? A paper that transfers ownership. To Diane. His frown deepened. No. I don't think so. It's dated April 30th. I don't remember that. Do you remember signing anything in April? He looked confused. Diane has me sign a lot of things. For the bills, for the insurance. Dad, this wasn't a bill. This was a deed. It means the house would go to Diane if something happened to you. Well, she's my wife. That makes sense, doesn't it? Not if you didn't understand what you were signing. He pulled back slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't think you knew what that document was. His expression shifted, confusion giving way to something sharper. Jesse, Diane wouldn't trick me. I'm not saying she tricked you. I'm saying she might not have explained it clearly. She explains everything. Does she? Yes. I could see him closing off, the defensiveness rising. I needed to pull back before I lost him completely. Okay, I said. I just wanted to make sure you knew. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, I know you don't like her. I never said that. You don't have to. I can tell. Dad. She's been good to me, Jesse. She takes care of me. You're not here. She is. The words hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. I wasn't here. I'd been 11 hours away, living my life, visiting twice a year. I know, I said quietly. I'm sorry. He softened. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just saying, she's not the enemy. I nodded. But I didn't believe him. Diane came back into the room. Everything okay? Fine, my father said. She looked at me. How long are you staying? A few days. You're welcome to stay here. I have a motel. Suit yourself. I stayed for another hour. We watched television together, my father dozing off halfway through a cooking show. Diane sat in the other chair, scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing at me like she was waiting for me to leave. When I finally stood to go, my father woke up and hugged me. It's good to see you, Jesse. You too, Dad. Diane walked me to the door. When we were out of earshot, she turned to me and lowered her voice. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. I'm checking on my father. You're upsetting him. I'm asking him questions. You're accusing me of something. I met her eyes. Should I be? Her expression went cold. You have no idea what I've done for him. What I've given up. You show up twice a year and think you understand our lives. I understand that he signed a deed he doesn't remember signing. Her face didn't change. He forgets things. He's 70 and just had surgery. Or someone didn't explain what he was signing. Get out. This is my father's house. Ard and low. And if you come back here accusing me of anything, I'll have you removed. I looked at her. Though. It's my house, she said, her voice HT about the fact that I'd been trained to walk into burning buildings, to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart. I thought about the fact that Diane thought I'd back down, that I'd leave quietly, that I'd let her win. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said. I walked to my car and drove back to the motel. My hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the motel bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what I had and what I needed. I had a power of attorney document that gave Diane control. I had a quitclaim deed that wasn't filed yet. I had a father who didn't remember signing it. I didn't have proof that Diane had lied to him. I didn't have a doctor's statement saying he wasn't competent. I didn't have legal standing to challenge anything unless my father agreed to challenge it himself. And he wouldn't. Because he trusted her. I thought about calling Martin Osborne, but I already knew what he'd say. Without my father's cooperation, I had no case. I thought about going to the police, but what would I report? A man signed a legal document. His wife had power of attorney. Nothing illegal had happened yet. I thought about the fact that sometimes, in fires, you can't save the building. You can only save the people inside. The next morning, I went back to the house. Diane's car wasn't in the driveway. I knocked, and my father answered. "Jesse. Come in." He looked better, more alert. He was dressed, his hair combed, his color improved. "Where's Diane?" "She had a showing. She'll be back this afternoon." I stepped inside. "Can we talk?" "Of course." We sat in the kitchen. I made coffee the way my mother used to, in the old percolator my father had kept. He watched me and smiled. "You make it just like she did. I learned from the best." He took a sip. "God, I miss her." "Me too." We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." He set his cup down. "Okay. I think Diane has been taking advantage of you." His face closed. "Jesse. Please. Just listen." He didn't speak. "She has power of attorney over your finances and your health. She had you sign a deed transferring the house to her. You don't remember signing either of those things." "I told you, I forget." "Dad, you don't forget signing away your house. Not unless someone made sure you didn't understand what you were signing. Diane wouldn't do that." "How do you know?" "Because she loves me." "Does she?" He stood up, his hands shaking. "I'm not having this conversation. Dad. You don't know her. You don't know what she's done for me. I know she cleared out Mom's things 3 months after moving in. I know she cut down the cottonwood tree without asking you. I know she won't let me talk to you without listening in." "That's not true. Isn't it?" He looked at me, and I saw something crack in his expression. Not anger. Doubt. "She's my wife," he said, but his voice was quieter now. "I know. And I know you love her. But love doesn't mean you stop protecting yourself." He sat back down. He stared at his coffee. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "I want you to revoke the power of attorney. And I want you to revoke the deed." "She'll be furious." "Probably. She'll leave." "Maybe." He looked up at me. "And then what?" "I'm 70 years old, Jesse. I just had heart surgery. I can't live alone." "You won't be alone. I'll help. We'll figure it out. You live in South Dakota. I'll move back." He stared at me. "You'd do that?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know if I can." "Can't what?" "Stand up to her." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't have to do it alone." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. "I'm so tired, Jesse." "I know. I just wanted someone to take care of me." "I know. Your mother did that. And then she was gone, and I didn't know how to do it myself." "That's okay. No, it's not. I should have been stronger. I squeezed his hand. You're strong enough. You just need help. He wiped his eyes. What do I do? First, we call the lawyer. We revoke the POA and the deed. Then we figure out the rest. What if she tries to stop us? She can't. Not if you're competent, and you are. He nodded. Slowly. Okay. Okay? Okay. Let's do it. I called Martin Osborne from my father's kitchen. I explained the situation, and he said he could draft revocation documents that afternoon. My father would need to sign them in front of a notary, and they'd need to be filed immediately. Can you come to us? I asked. My father just had surgery. Travel is hard. I can come to you. I'll be there in 2 hours. I hung up and looked at my father. He's coming here. What do I tell Diane? Nothing. Not yet. She doesn't need to know until it's done. He nodded, but I could see the fear in his face. We waited. I made more coffee. We talked about small things, my work, his recovery, the weather. At one point, he said, "Do you think she ever loved me?" I didn't know how to answer that. So I said, "I think she loved the idea of you." He nodded. That's what I think too. Martin Osborne arrived at noon. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He shook my father's hand and sat down at the kitchen table. "Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you some questions to make sure you understand what we're doing." Okay. Do you understand that you currently have a power of attorney in place naming your wife as your agent? Yes. Do you want to revoke that? Yes. And do you understand that you signed a quitclaim deed transferring your house to your wife? My father hesitated. I didn't understand it at the time. But yes, I know now. Do you want to revoke that as well? Yes. Martin took notes. Then he said, "I need to make sure you're doing this of your own free will. Is anyone forcing you?" No. My daughter explained it to me, but this is my choice. Good. Martin pulled documents out of his briefcase. These are the revocation forms. I'll walk you through them. It took 20 minutes. My father signed each one carefully, his hand steadier than I expected. The notary Martin had brought, a woman from his office, witnessed and stamped each document. When it was done, Martin said, "I'll file these today. The POA is revoked effective immediately. The deed revocation will be recorded by end of business." My father nodded. He looked exhausted. "Thank you," I said. Martin stood. "Call me if there are any issues." After he left, my father and I sat in silence. "What now?" he asked. "Now we wait for Diane to come home." "She's going to be angry." "Yes." "What if she doesn't leave?" "She doesn't have a choice. This is your house." He looked around the kitchen, the place my mother used to make bread, the place Diane had repainted and redecorated and claimed as her own. "It doesn't feel like mine anymore," he said. "We'll make it yours again." He nodded. But he didn't look convinced. Diane came home at 3. I heard her car in the driveway, the sound of her heels on the walkway. She opened the door and called out, "Richard?" "In here," my father said. She walked into the kitchen and stopped when she saw me. "You're still here?" "Yes." She looked at my father. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay." She set her purse on the counter and pulled out her phone. "I have another showing at 5, so I'll need to leave soon." "Diane," my father said. She looked up. "I need to talk to you." Her expression shifted. "About what?" "I revoked the power of attorney." The room went very still. "What?" Her voice was calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "And the deed?" "For the house." Her eyes moved to me. "You did this." He did this, I said. Bullshit. She turned to my father. Richard, what is she talking about? I signed papers today. With a lawyer. The power of attorney is revoked. And the deed. Her face went white. You can't do that. I can. And I did. Richard, you don't understand. I understand that you had me sign things I didn't understand. And I understand that this is my house, not yours. Diane's hands were shaking. She set her phone down carefully. I have done everything for you. Everything. I gave up my life to take care of you. I didn't ask you to. You needed me. I needed help. Not control. Her voice went cold. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her purse. Fine. I'll pack my things. Diane. She walked out of the kitchen. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard drawers opening and closing. My father sat very still, staring at his hands. Are you okay? I asked. I don't know. 30 minutes later, Diane came back downstairs with 2 suitcases. She set them by the door and walked back into the kitchen. She looked at my father, and for a moment I thought she might say something soft, something human. But instead, she said, "You'll regret this." And then she walked out. We heard her car start, heard the tires on the gravel, heard the sound fade into silence. My father sat at the table and put his head in his hands. It's okay, I said. But he was already crying. I stayed in Fargo for 2 weeks. I took extended leave from work and moved into my father's house to help him recover. We fell into a rhythm. I made breakfast, he read the paper, we took short walks around the neighborhood. Slowly, the house started to feel different. Lighter. I began putting my mother's things back. Not all of them, some were gone, sold or donated by Diane years earlier. But the things my father had saved, tucked away in the attic or the basement, I brought back out. A quilt my mother had sewn. Her favorite coffee mug. Photographs. My father cried when he saw them. But he also smiled. I forgot I still had these, he said. She'd want you to have them. She'd want you to have them too. I took a few things, a scarf, a book of poetry, a necklace, but I left most of it with him. He needed it more than I did. One afternoon, while my father was napping, I went through the paperwork Diane had left behind. Most of it was routine, bills, insurance forms, bank statements. But there was one folder I found in her desk drawer, tucked beneath a stack of real estate flyers. Inside were documents related to my father's finances. Account statements showing withdrawals I didn't recognize. A credit card in my father's name that I'd never seen, with a balance of $18,000. And a letter from a financial advisor, dated 2 months earlier, congratulating Diane on setting up a joint investment account. I called the bank. The representative confirmed that a joint account had been opened in March, with my father and Diane as co-owners. Diane had deposited $73,000, money transferred from my father's savings. Where is the money now? I asked. It was withdrawn on June 10th. 4 days after my father's surgery. Withdrawn by whom? By Mrs. Brennan. She's listed as a co-owner. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Martin Osborne. She drained his savings, I said. How much? $73,000. Martin was quiet for a moment. That's theft. Or at least financial exploitation. Can we get it back? We can try. But it'll be expensive, and it'll take time. You'd need to prove she took it without his knowledge or consent. He doesn't even know it's gone. Then you need to tell him. I hung up and sat in the kitchen, staring at the documents. I thought about the fact that Diane had smiled at me on the porch, had poured me iced tea, had told me the house would stay with her. I thought about the fact that she'd already taken everything she could before I even knew to look. I thought about the difference between what people say and what they do. When my father woke up, I told him. I showed him the account statements, the withdrawals, the timeline. He stared at the papers like they were written in a language he didn't understand. She took it, he said finally. Yes. All of it? He said, I'm proud of you, Claire. For what you've built. I felt something shift in my chest, a small release of tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. I said, thank you. He said, I mean it. We talked for a few more minutes, surface-level updates about work and life. Before we hung up, he said, do you think Dad would be proud of what you've done? I said, I hope so. He said, I know so. After we hung up, I sat on the porch with Marcus. He asked what Caleb had said. I told him. Marcus said, that took courage. For him to say that. I said, it did. Marcus said, do you feel any different? Now that he's acknowledged it? I thought about it. I said, a little. But mostly I feel the same. I didn't build this for his approval. I built it because it needed building. Marcus said, that's the difference between you and him. I said, what is? He said, you don't need external validation. You know what you've done. I said, I learned that from the land. He said, how so? I said, the land doesn't care about your intentions or your excuses. It only responds to what you actually do. You can talk about farming all you want, but if you don't plant the seeds, nothing grows. Marcus said, and you planted. I said, yeah. I planted. We sat in silence, watching the sun set over fields I'd tended for 35 years, 15 as a farmhand, 20 as an owner. The light turned everything gold, the cotton and the soybeans and the distant tree line all glowing in the dusk. I thought about Dad, about the quiet way he'd set things in motion, the codicil he'd added without fanfare or explanation. I thought about the water rights, the leverage they'd given me, the way they'd forced Caleb to reckon with value he'd never considered. And I thought about the lesson I'd carry forward, the truth I'd learned in soil and sweat and stubborn refusal to accept someone else's version of my worth. Inheritance isn't just what's handed to you. It's what you do with what you're given. Caleb inherited land. I inherited water rights. He tried to sell. I chose to build. In the end, the land remembered who tended it. And it gave back accordingly. Not with dramatic justice or public vindication. Just with steady, reliable growth, the kind that comes from showing up, doing the work, and trusting that the ground beneath you will hold. That was my father's final gift. Not the water rights themselves, but the lesson they taught. Some things can't be bought or sold. They can only be earned. And once earned, they become the foundation for everything else. 25 years after the funeral, I stood in the renovated barn during the farm's annual harvest festival. The space was full, neighbors, customers, families with children running between the hay bales and the pumpkin displays. Jasmine was managing the farm stand, Leonard's son was giving tractor rides, and Marcus was grilling corn near the main house. I watched it all from the doorway, this thing I'd built, and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with completion. A young woman approached me, maybe 25, wearing jeans and boots. She said, "Excuse me, are you Claire?" I said, "I am." She said, "I'm Emma Voss. I received the Granger Farm Scholarship 3 years ago. I just wanted to say thank you." I said, "You're welcome. What are you doing now?" She said, "I'm finishing my master's in soil science. I want to work in sustainable agriculture, help small farms transition to regenerative practices." I said, "That's good work." She said, "It's because of people like you. You showed it's possible to run a profitable farm without destroying the land." I said, "It takes time." She said, "I know. But I'm willing to put in the time." I looked at her, this young woman with dirt under her nails and fire in her eyes, and I saw myself at that age. Before the farm was mine, before the water rights, before I understood what I was capable of. I said, if you ever need advice, or a reference, or just someone to talk to who understands, call me. She said, really? I said, really. She thanked me and disappeared into the crowd. Marcus found me a few minutes later. He said, you okay? I said, yeah. Just thinking. He said, about what? I said, about how strange it is that the worst day of my life led to the best thing I ever did. He said, the day your brother told you to leave? I said, yeah. He said, was it really the worst day? I thought about it. I said, at the time, yes. But looking back, it was the day I stopped waiting for permission and started building something that was mine. Marcus said, your father gave you permission. I said, no. He gave me leverage. I gave myself permission. Marcus smiled. He said, that's an important distinction. The festival ran until sunset. When the last guests had left and the cleanup was done, I walked out into the fields alone. The moon was rising, full and bright, casting silver light across the rows of cotton. I thought about the 35 years I'd spent on this land. The blisters and the backaches, the failed crops and the good harvests, the loan payments and the slow accumulation of equity. I thought about Caleb, about the choice he'd made to sell, and the choice I'd made to stay. Neither choice was wrong. They were just different. He'd wanted liquidity, mobility, freedom from the land. I'd wanted roots, stability, something I could tend. We'd both gotten what we wanted. And in getting it, we'd both learned who we were. I walked back to the house, where Marcus was waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of wine. I sat beside him and took one. He said, long day. I said, good day. He said, what are you going to do tomorrow? I said, same thing I do every day. Check the fields, talk to Jasmine about the winter planting schedule, maybe fix the irrigation line in the south field. He said, you ever think about slowing down? I said, sometimes. But then I think about all the things that still need doing, and I figure I'll slow down when they're done. He said, they'll never be done. I said, I know. He said, so you'll just keep working until you can't. I said, probably. He said, that's very you. I said, is it? He said, completely. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking our wine and watching the fields under the moonlight. And I thought about the question Emma had asked earlier, about how I'd shown it was possible to run a profitable farm without destroying the land. The answer wasn't complicated. You just had to care more about the land than the profit. You had to see it as something you were borrowing from the future, not something you owned outright. That was the lesson I'd learned from my father, and from the land itself, and from 35 years of showing up and doing the work. The land doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. And if you tend it well, it tends you back. Not with guarantees or certainty, but with steady, reliable growth. The kind that lasts. 30 years after the funeral, I sold a conservation easement on 200 of the farm's 400 acres. The easement permanently protected the land from development, ensuring it would remain agricultural in perpetuity. The payment was $600,000, which I used to establish an endowment for the scholarship fund and to set up a land trust that would eventually take ownership of the farm after my death. Jasmine would manage it. We'd worked out the details with Richard, who was still practicing law in his 80s, sharp as ever. The trust would keep the farm operating, provide employment, and continue the educational programs we'd built. I was 63. Marcus was 65. We were both slowing down, spending more time on the porch and less time in the fields. But the farm was running smoothly, the operation was sustainable, and the land was protected. Caleb had retired from his law practice and moved to Florida. We talked a few times a year, friendly calls that never went too deep. He'd sold his house in Savannah and bought a condo on the coast. He seemed content. One afternoon, he called and said, Claire, I've been working on something, and I wanted to share it with you. I said, okay. He said, I've been writing a memoir. Nothing fancy, just something for my kids, about growing up on the farm and the choices I made. I said, that sounds nice. He said, I wrote about what happened after Dad died. About the water rights, the sale that fell through, the way you ended up buying the land. I said, what did you write? He said, that I was an arrogant fool who thought I knew better than everyone else. That I underestimated you, and it cost me the farm. I said, you didn't lose the farm. You sold it. He said, to you. For half what it was worth. I said, it was worth exactly what you got, given that I held the water rights. He laughed. He said, that's true. But still. I wanted to write it down, so my kids would know that I made mistakes, and that those mistakes had consequences. I said, that's honest. He said, I learned that from you. We talked for a while longer, about his grandchildren, about his life in Florida, about the farm and how it was doing. Before we hung up, he said, I'm proud of what you built, Claire. I hope you know that. I said, I know. He said, I wish I'd said it sooner. I said, you're saying it now. That's enough. After we hung up, I sat on the porch and thought about forgiveness, about anger, about the long slow process of letting go of hurt. I'd forgiven Caleb years ago, not because he'd apologized but because holding on to anger was exhausting. But hearing him acknowledge what had happened, hearing him name his mistakes, that meant something. Not because I needed his validation. But because it closed a loop I hadn't realized was still open. Marcus joined me on the porch. He said, Caleb? I said, yeah. He said, what did he want? I told him. Marcus said, that took a lot. For him to admit he was wrong. I said, it did. Marcus said, how do you feel? I said, lighter. We sat in silence, watching the sun set over the fields I'd tended for 40 years. The land was green and lush, the crops thriving, the irrigation system running smoothly. Everything I'd built was here. The farm, the scholarship, the land trust. The life I'd chosen, the work I'd done, the legacy I'd leave behind. It wasn't perfect. There had been hard years, failed crops, financial scares. But it was mine, and it was real, and it had mattered. That was enough. More than enough. Everything. The next morning, I walked out into the fields at dawn, the way I'd done for 40 years. The air was cool, the sky just starting to lighten. The cotton was waist-high, the leaves heavy with dew. I ran my hand over the plants, felt the rough texture of the leaves, and thought about all the seasons I'd seen, all the cycles of planting and harvest, growth and rest. I thought about my father, about the water rights he'd left me, about the quiet way he'd ensured I'd have what I needed. I thought about Caleb, about the anger and the reconciliation, the long years of distance and the recent warmth. I thought about Marcus, about the life we'd built together, the partnership we'd forged. And I thought about the land itself, the soil and the water and the minerals beneath, the layers of value that couldn't be seen but could be felt. This was what I'd learned in 40 years of farming. The land doesn't care about your plans or your pride. It only responds to what you give it. And if you give it time, attention, and care, it gives back, not always in the way you expect, but always in proportion to what you've invested. That's true of land. It's true of relationships. It's true of life. You can't force growth. You can only create the conditions for it, and then wait. I walked back to the house as the sun crested the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and amber. Marcus was in the kitchen making coffee. The dogs were asleep on the porch. Everything was exactly where it should be. I'd started as a farmhand, someone who worked land I didn't own. I'd become an owner, a steward, a builder of something that would outlast me. Not because I was special. But because I'd stayed. Because I'd tended. Because I'd refused to let someone else's vision of value override my own. The soil remembers who tends it. And in the end, it's the tending that matters. Not the title. Not the deed.